At first glance, this should seem like an easy text to preach, a beautiful text. It's a pretty terrible text to preach, truthfully. Because I can gaze out and know every person in this room who's thinking something like, Jesus, if you had only been here, my child wouldn't have died. My mother would still be with me. My beloved would still be in the other half of my bed every morning. And the truth is, I'm not here to tell you that miracle is working on your behalf right now. The scandal of the story of Lazarus is that Lazarus alone was raised from the dead by Jesus. The scandal of that story is that in roughly 18 minutes from now, I'm not going to go tell you to call people out of the grave, literally. I can't do it for you either. And tragically, Jesus isn't waiting in the wings. There's a pain to that, a real pain. Because who among us hasn't said at some point, "Oh God, I'll do anything if you just make this untrue"? There's a deep wisdom to Ezekiel in the dry bones text that resonates with this, right? When God says to Ezekiel, "O mortal, can these bones live?" What does Ezekiel say? You know. Which could be the cowardly way out. But there's a deep wisdom to Ezekiel who's unwilling to say, who's willing to admit, I don't know the answer to that question. Right? I don't know if these bones can live. That's an open question to Ezekiel. Its answer isn't easily tossed off. Over here, Jesus is saying to Martha, yes, do you believe? Do you really believe? Because how often might we toss off a yes, I believe, because we don't want to admit, I don't really believe these bones can live. And truthfully, I think when Martha says to Jesus, yes, I know he will rise in the last day, she's tossing that off as cold comfort to her now. Yeah, Jesus, but I want to hug my brother now. And no day to come can give me today. The picture on the bulletin, if you haven't looked at the art from this week that we're also engaging, the second picture is called Unbind Him. And it looks like you can see the lace. It's actually a cloth material painted and then a lace overlay. And when I first looked at it, I was thinking to myself, it looks like Lazarus is trying to break out of the grave, right? But when you read the artist's comment, The hands actually represent the community reaching into Lazarus to tear away the burial clothes he is buried in. And I playfully said Wednesday night, well, the artist is wrong about her own art. But it's worked on me because I've started to realize what she's done is write this text through this picture from Lazarus's point of view. We don't spend any time in that grave, right? We don't spend any time with Lazarus. In fact, Lazarus says nothing in this text. The text ends right as Lazarus finally, fully comes to life. And I think also we have a tendency to want to be enamored of what is happening on the outside of the tomb. We're interested in messiahs. We're interested in seeing ourselves on the Messiah side of the text. What is our work to raise the dead? But I want to linger over here in the tomb. Because I think most of us feel the cling of death. I think most of us do not have a hard time imagining a valley of bones that are not just bones, but very dry. I don't think most of us struggle to know what it feels like to be trapped in death or have its cling on you and not know how to pull it all off. Kind of like when you walk through a spider web and you spend the rest of the day sure there's still fragments of that web clinging to you and you just can't get them all out of your hair. Death clings to us so. One of the things I've observed for 20 plus years about asking people to publicly raise prayer concerns is that rightfully people are quick to name the prayer concern for their neighbor. They're quick to lift up a loved one that's going through a thing, right? And that's good and that's right. All prayer is all good and right. We struggle to say, I'd like you to pray for me today. I'd like you to pray because I don't think these bones can live. Or I'm finding myself surrounded by family members who are having need of me, and I don't have any answer other than only God knows. Because it's hard for us to admit our own vulnerability. It's hard for us to admit when death is clinging to us. It's hard for us to admit when we don't know if we can answer God or Jesus about whether we believe that these bones can live. So the first call on this text to me is to not rush to the good news aspects of the text. There's good news in this text, y'all. The bones can live. Not in the timeline we want, not in the ways that we always want. But there's some good news. But I don't want to rush there because sometimes I think we just need to name and claim that I'm not sure these bones can live, and I'm in need of a lot of help. I'm in need of someone else giving me some new insight of finding the clinging death and pulling it off me. It's true in literal ways and metaphorical ways, in the ways we lay in death in our life. I think about people who are unhoused, and it seems easy to just work at a job and get housed, but the coffin has been nailed down around them to make sure that nothing is working on their behalf to help them in that situation. Death is clinging to them. There are people who are grieving the loss of loved ones, and the world, with its short memory, moves on. There are caregivers struggling who had a million, I'm guilty of this, of giving you a million ways that I'll help you in the first week. But in week 2, I've moved on, and you're still there, nailing down the coffin around you. There are diagnoses that you sit across from a doctor and you refuse to believe what you're hearing. Second opinions, third opinions. Cannot anyone. That doesn't mean I have very little time left to live. And it's okay to stop and weep. Jesus will stop and weep with you. So I filmed my sermon teaser for this week, and 28 of you watched it. It's all right, I forgive you. And 2 people reached out right away that they were worried about me. I was feeling the text. It came in at a time when I'd gotten some other bad news. I read verbally and visually depressed, and I was, and it's okay. I'm okay. And it's legitimate to want to help unbind me from that feeling, right? Last night, I got a third text about the sermon teaser and permission to read it to you with a few changes. So, I had an entire response to your sermon teaser typed. I have my last meeting with my parole officer on Friday, and believe me, in the past 5 years, I had simply hoped to survive this. But you've been there to see us, to see me thrive. I truly don't think it's possible alone. The support we've received from those unnamed is amazing, and I'll never know how to repay that. I just thought you should know I recognize these old bones aren't dead, and they see what is coming. The light is powerful. I made it. I survived, but more than that, I thrived. In both Ezekiel and in Lazarus' story, God needs to work 2 different miracles. God raises the dead, I will say, with ease. Knits the bones together or makes Lazarus come out, but they aren't yet alive. And then God says to Ezekiel, get the winds, get the whole world involved, and breathe these bones back to life. And then Jesus says to the gathered community of mourners, go to him and pull off the bindings that are keeping him in death. And a second miracle is made to open them up to a possibility that life can go on. A life consistent with the goodness I once knew and don't now feel. That this dry bones moment, this death that clings now, can be the anomaly. And I can find and help have found for me a way through that despair to a place of hope. It's a communal project. It's started by God. It takes roots in our hearts, and it takes an entire community of people hugging us into a new world, says the guy that doesn't like hugs. I want to hold these two things together in this text: the impossibility and the scandal and the dusty deathness of it. If you tell them I'll be done in like 3 minutes, it's all right. It's all right. We needed a little break. If we hold this dusty death, our ability to name truthfully the realities that hurt the most in us and get them out of us, with the hope that comes from a community and the Spirit of God rallying around us and within us to carry us through that, to pull off those vestiges of death and help us find life. Can these bones live? It's an act of radical faith to say yes. It's an act of community to make that yes come to be. Unbind your imagination. Fight off the despair that's holding on to your heart, and believe. Grab the hand of your neighbor and walk into tomorrow. These bones will live.